What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Eastern Current. I could not tell you what episode this is. I meant to look that up before I started recording. I think it's episode 38, but it doesn't really matter. Maybe 39, maybe 40. But yeah, this is another Weekend Warrior episode. We've got a really cool guest on, someone that I talk with a lot. I would consider him someone that's kind of in my network of anglers that I speak with on a regular basis. I think that's such an important part of being successful in the water is just kind of keeping up with trends and tactics by communicating with other people that are fishing in similar areas as you. But like I've been mentioning in the past couple episodes, we've started a Facebook group. We already had a Facebook page, but this Facebook group is for anyone that enjoys listening to this podcast to come and kind of communicate with other people that enjoy the podcast. And hopefully we want to create a fishing community where you can make friends to fish with, bounce questions off of each other, ideas, tactics, share pictures, share fishing reports, and hopefully just, grow a community of like anglers out there. So check that out. It's Eastern Current Fishing on Facebook. You can also check out our Instagram page. It's Eastern Current, our website, ET Current. But yeah, we're going to do another Weekend Warrior episode today. I was just going to do one every other week, but I think I'm going to try to do one every week. So the normal podcast will record live on Tuesday nights where you can check it out on Facebook. If you can't check it out the next day, it'll be live on YouTube as well as the podcast platforms. And then these pre-recorded Weekend Warrior episodes are going to come out on Thursday. So be looking for them. They're not going to be quite as long, about 30 minutes. I prefer the 30-minute podcast myself when I'm listening to podcasts. It's just not as much time commitment as an hour and 15 minutes. But yeah, if you know any Weekend Warrior anglers that you'd like to hear from, just send them over in any of our platforms, and we'll check them out and hopefully get them on the show. But enough of me rambling. Let me introduce y'all to Griffin Zwack. Here he is. What's up, Griffin?
Hey guys, how you doing?
Doing good, man.
Um,
Doing good. It's we'll have to get. I always have to get used to that it's not live because I'll like ask questions to people and I'm like, wait a second.
that's weird,
But yeah,
but yeah,
thanks for coming on the show.
yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on the show.
Definitely, man.
Um,
Definitely.
but
You've got a pretty good reputation around town of catching fish and offshore and inshore. I think one of the
that's
coolest
good to
things
hear.
about you is the paddleboard fishing and how successful you are fishing from a paddleboard. But let's start out with just kind of give everybody your backstory, where you're from, like how'd you get into fishing, like from the get go until now.
Yeah, so I was actually born in Anchorage, Alaska, and up there it's a lot of fishing up there. So my dad, he's a big fisherman as well. He does paddleboard fishing as well. We fish a lot, but I kind of got introduced to fishing. I got hooked on salmon fishing. And that's a blast, just fishing rivers for salmon. And I started pretty young. I probably like 4 or 5, like really young. And I don't know. After my first salmon, I was just really into it. And every day I would just beg my dad after work, let's go fishing. And then after 8 years, we moved down here to North Carolina. And I I heard a lot about the red drum fishing. And I was really into fishing. I didn't really know what I was doing at first. And people like back then, paddleboards weren't that big of a thing. So most people would just end up kayak fishing, and paddleboards were just starting to come out, like just in general, like paddleboard.
Yeah, yeah.
So we got 2 boards, and one we still have one of them actually. But the one board, we had both those boards, and we kind of started out just paddleboarding, but we didn't have a boat back then, so we both liked to go fishing, my dad and I. So we decided to try to figure out the paddleboard fishing. We didn't really like kayak fishing. I'm not a big fan of sitting down fishing, so I like to stand up and I like to go sight fish, and that's kind of my forte. But yeah, I started trying it on paddleboard and out in Wrightsville Beach, and it was a blast. And you can catch a bunch of different stuff. You can get to where boats can't get, and you can do basically whatever you want, take whatever you want with you, and keep some fish. But it's really fun. But yeah, it's kind of my backstory. Just moved to North Carolina, tried paddleboard, and got really into it, and now I'm fishing off them now.
Have you ever fallen off your paddleboard when it's really cold out?
Oh yes, multiple times. Last winter, I was just like doing a scouting trip, and I had my phone in my jacket, and my mom called me, and I took it out, and I was putting it back in my jacket, it fumbled and fell off, or fell out of my hand and into the water. And it's like in the winter, it's really clear, so normally you'll be able to like look down and see it. And I just watched the phone just start sinking back and forth down to the bottom, and it's like 7 feet deep right there. but I had to end up. It was probably like a 3 mile paddle from my house, so it was pretty far. But I didn't have goggles, so I had to like strip down, jump in the water, look for it, and I
Oh
eventually ended up
gosh.
getting it after like I had to paddle all the way back to my house and back, get goggles, and it was just a mess. But no, I fell off a little bit. I mean, I'm pretty good now to the point where I don't fall off much, but every few months I make a little slip and end up in the water.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I fall off my skiff sometimes into the water, so I know that it's got to happen on the paddleboard some. It's been a
oh yeah,
while
it
since I've
happens
fallen
a
off
little
the
bit.
skiff, but it happens.
Yeah, I actually fell off like I think last week. I was just messing around and just not really paying attention. I hit bottom and I stand on a 45 quart cooler, so I get pretty high up there. And
Yeah.
so my board's really sturdy, so I'm able to do it. But like sometimes it just I don't know, just balance just gives out on me and topple over. But I normally stand on that cooler, and I got a little too shallow, and my fins hit, and cooler kind of rocked forward because it was too light, and off I went. But it happens
Gosh.
every once in a while. But
Those
it's
coolers, man,
not
when you
too
don't
much.
strap them down and they get that little rock to them, the Yeti coolers, it'll
Oh yeah.
send you. I've used them as like casting platforms before on skiffs and stuff, and like you're saying, you'll bump the sand or something, and it rocks a little bit and throws you off. But I think what I wanted to touch on real quick was a point you brought up that I think is so important is about paddleboard fishing and kayak fishing in general is you're able to be you can access so much water and you can get to stuff that boats can't get to, and you can be in places and get to places at low tide that other people can't get to. And like we know, the less water, the more concentrated the fish, especially this time of year. So, do you see that giving you a large advantage in the winter, being able to, or really all year, being able to get into these shallow areas at low tide?
Oh yeah, it gives me a huge advantage. Most of the boats, like when I talk to people who have skiffs or like flat bottom boats, I mean, they can get in most of the spots I fish and like below mid tide. And on paddle boards, like I'll be pulling them over like pieces of marsh or little cuts of marsh and over dry sandbars a lot.
Yeah,
And especially at low tides when you get those really low tides, you're walking the board a lot and like you said, they're really concentrated. It's basically like fish out of a barrel. And if you
yeah,
find a school of fish at low tide, it's fun. You just get to hammer them for a little while there, but yeah, it gives you a huge advantage. And even like you can get to areas where boats are. The only disadvantage I would say with paddleboards is you don't have as much range. Like whereas a boat, you have an engine, obviously, you
right.
can get pretty far. But I can only fish a certain amount of water. And I mean, I know that water pretty well because I mean that's the only water I fish. I stay in the same spots, but yeah, it gives me a huge advantage, and I can get to a lot of spots where most boats can't. I mean, boats can get there at higher tides, but I mean, in my opinion, better times to fish for these fish are at lower tides when they're a
Definitely,
little more schooled up and whatnot. But
definitely.
yeah, I think it gives me a huge advantage, and furthermore, I think paddle boards are a bigger advantage in kayaks. So a lot of the fishing kayaks are now are shifting more towards pedal drives, and
Right.
I just saw something today actually where there was like Old Town kayaks, I think it was like making a new kayak with like a mink coated trolling motor
Yeah, I've
as
seen
like
that.
a yeah, I saw it today. I was like, dang. But those kayaks can't really get that shallow. I mean, there's obviously other kayaks and you can get a little shallower, but I just feel like with paddle boards, it's more of like standing up and basically every time I go out paddleboard fishing, I'm getting off the board, even if it's 30 degrees and the water's freezing. But I'm always getting off the board. I'll carry it over like little pieces of or little areas of dry land, or I'll have to move around on the board so I get a little shallower. But yeah, it gives me a huge advantage and gets me into the fish.
Yeah, for sure. I'm oftentimes jealous of like guys that are kayak fishing, and the grass is always greener. I mean, you could have the sickest boat for this or that, and then you want a paddleboard, or you want a kayak, or you've got a kayak and a paddleboard,
Yeah.
but you want a boat. Really, I always love asking people if they could have like five. We won't go into this here because it can be such a long conversation. But if you could have like
Oh
five
yeah.
vessels to fish from, like what would they be? Like what would be your five things? And you're like, oh, five, that's gonna be plenty. You start to name them out, and you're like, oh, I need like eight. If I could, you start getting all greedy, and you want all these different things. But yeah,
Yeah.
I would say like just looking from the outside, the advantage of the kayak would maybe be you'd have a little bit more range than a paddleboard. I feel like you could probably move quicker
Yeah.
on a
Yeah. You
kayak,
can definitely.
especially paddle drive or pedal drive.
Hmm.
And
But
then,
yeah,
oh, sorry.
especially with the board I have. I mean, most boards are monohulls, but the board I have is a called from the company Live Water Sports,
Yep.
and they're actually cat boards. So it's a cat design, and they're look. What I've noticed is it's very hard to turn, and you can't get that fast on them. But I mean, the stability on that thing is insane,
Yeah.
and it can carry, I think, 500 pounds. So
Wow.
I've managed to fit like three people on that board just messing around, but not
That's
fishing,
awesome.
not
Yeah.
fishing. But yeah, it's definitely a interesting thing with, like I said, how fishing kayaks are kind of moving in a certain direction. There's also the kind of fishing paddle boards now that are kind of being developed, and some of them, like, they'll have like little stick pin holes in the board. They'll have like mounts for power poles. I have one on my board, but I'm not blessed enough with that opportunity. That would be a game changer right there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely a weird design board. It's the only cat design board I think they sell. So they have to sell a 12-foot, which is one I have, and a 14-foot. But yeah, it's a unique paddle board, so gets a lot of looks on the water. But I don't know, it doesn't get as shallow as some boards, but it does pretty well.
I think the stability, though, factor for wanting to be able to stand up on that cooler and be able to sight fish, I feel like that's key. You know, if you're just kind of paddleboarding and blind casting, the stability, maybe you don't need that much. You don't need that height advantage, but I can see how, you know, that cat would help you be way stable back there. But all right, so let's talk about this a little bit. Like you were saying, you've got such a small range. Not a Excuse me, I just burped into the microphone. You've got a smaller range with a kayak or with a paddleboard than you do with a boat. But I think that can be a huge benefit. And the area that you fish, I was talking with you earlier before the show, and I was like, I think you probably know that area better than anybody because you fish a lot, but you focus so much, you know, on the water that you can access. And I think that, you know, can be such a benefit for all these people that are listening and that are using the internet as like trying to learn how to be more successful with the time they've got on the water. I think picking an area and really focusing on just learning every bit of that area at all tides is important. And I wanted you to share a little bit about kind of, you know, how spending so much time fishing around Wrightsville Beach has been successful for you. Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So like, yeah, like when you're paddleboarding, you're obviously not running 30 so miles an
Right.
hour going past all these spots. You're going slow through all these spots. Like you'd be going the same speed as if you were fishing there. So when you're going through these spots, you're looking around in the water, whether it's the winter or the summer with the water clarity. And I mean, you're going to be seeing fish spook by you the entire time.
Yeah.
So you really learn spots where people wouldn't think of, like some spots along like main bodies of water that's just like little banks that are really good. There's like fish there,
Yeah.
but most people would just drive by those on a regular day and wouldn't even think to stop there. But yeah, you really, when you find a school of fish or you find a group of fish or something, you really go to that spot and just study that spot. Like sometimes after I've gotten to school down, they've been there for like a week or two, and I've fished them a bunch. I can almost go to the spot and point out exactly where I think they're going to be and
Yeah.
go up to it and spook the fish. But yeah, it really helps you narrow down to know what you're looking for in an area. When you go on Google Maps, I know this has been emphasized a lot with a lot of fishermen, and I've
Uh-huh.
heard it on the podcast before. But Google Maps, when you find a school of fish or you find an area that has fish in it, you can go look on Google Maps and look for similarities between the places, and
100%.
that generally helps a lot with trying to find new areas. Because I remember when I first moved here, I had basically no idea what to look for. I was just piling around blindly. But now I kind of know what to look for in an area, and I kind of have my 6 or 7 spots I like to hit and see where the fish are, and I kind of know what to look for in each spot, and it's really helpful. But yeah, I definitely think going slower and covering the smaller restricted area of water, it really helps you key in on the certain parts of that water and what to look for in the water when trying to find the fish.
Yeah, I agree 100%. What would you say your favorite tide as a paddleboard fisherman? What's your favorite tide to get out there and fish? I think we touched on it a little bit earlier,
Ooh,
but
I definitely have to say, like, depending on how low tide is, like if it's a low tide, like it's not a low tide, I'll probably say like an hour before low tide. But if
uh-huh.
you get like a below like a negative point 0.2 or point 0.3, I love fishing like the last 2 hours of falling. Falling's my favorite tide. Like now that I've started to actually like do a little more sight fishing, I kind of like the mid tide ish area of falling, but I don't really. I'm not a big fan of the high tide fishery. I've tried to look for fish at high tide, and it's just like just covering an entire ocean of water on a little tiny paddleboard. So it's
Right.
kind of hard to find the fish. But
Yeah, I
I
would
definitely
agree.
think low tide's the best.
I would agree. It seems like For me, if I am going to be successful at high tide, I've got to find those shallow dead end fingers where, those fish are pushing back up and sitting back at a dead end, and hanging out, kind of trying to get in the shallowest water they can, which they don't do a ton this time of year. You see that more in the
Mm.
summer with a layup on those grass edges back in the back. But I'm with you, man. It can be so daunting at high tide when you check your one or two spots that you thought were going to be good, and then you're like, oh gosh, what do I do from here on out? And even booking trips. I mean, all my trips are booked around sight fishing trips, at least booked around the specific lower tides, the last 2 hours of the falling, first 2 hours of the incoming, and yeah, that's cool. It seems like too those last 2 hours of the falling tide, like you were saying, or mid tide to low, the fish feed better. Like you see them actively, hunting pretty hard, and then at dead low, I feel like some of the areas I fish, like I'll see very little activity when the tide is slack or when it's falling, and then when it's incoming, they'll be feeding really hard. And then like up here, up north, I feel like it's vice versa. It's like that last bit of the falling tide, they're feeding really hard, and then the incoming and slack, it kind of slows off a little bit. But there's always, I think it's spot dependent too. Like certain fish in certain
Mhm.
areas will feed hard at certain tides, and vice versa. But yeah, that's cool. That's I always like to hear what people, based upon what kind of fishing they do, what they look for tide wise. So when you're getting ready, to go paddleboard fishing the day before, or the week before, maybe you've got class or work, and you're trying to figure out what you're going to go do. What's your planning process? Like, what are you looking for a good day of paddleboard fishing?
So I know this kind of all fishermen think the same thing is everyone hates the wind. No one likes a windy day. So that's the
Right.
main thing I look for. Before I even look at the tides or the clouds or the if it's sunny out, I look strictly at the wind. And if it's less than I don't really like going above like 15 is pretty windy. Like if you're fishing an open spot, it's no fun. I mean, you can do it, but I mean, you got to be in a really tight enclosed space where the wind's buffered out. But no, I like to go look for the wind as the first thing, and then this next thing I do is I look for the low tide, what time it is, and how low the low tide is going to be. And depending on that, if it's like a low tide in like the mid morning, I'll try to get out probably like 2 or 3 hours before that and kind of just look around. And I like to go. Lately I've been doing a lot more sight fishing, so it's more. I'm getting out and having to spend more time in the water, which I've never really done in the past. But
Right.
I definitely think the key factors when it comes to paddleboard fishing is 100% the wind. Is you
Yeah.
want to make sure you don't have a lot of wind. Now on glass calm days, sometimes it's weird. The fish is really spooky and it's hard to get them. So sometimes it's nice to have like that little 5 mile an hour, a little bit of ripple on the surface,
Yeah, I agree.
so it's not as spooky. But it's definitely the wind is the first thing I check for, and the second thing I check for is the tides, and then I kind of just go based off that. I could really care less honestly about if it's sunny or cloudy for the most part.
For sure. What would you say are some of the things you always have on the paddleboard with you? What are some key pieces of gear? Not talking about tackle, but let's just talk gear first. Like, what do you like to take out on the boat with you, or on the paddleboard with you?
So on my board, there's little gear tracks, and on the some of the websites, like they have like things you can put on those gear tracks for on paddleboards.
Uh
So
huh.
I have on my board specifically. I at first when I had it, I didn't really like it as much, but it's this little black box in the front, and I put it on the front of the board, and it has three rod holders on the side. And I mean I don't really use those. Maybe I'll fill it one at a time, and then I have two more rod holders in the back, and I always have those filled up, and those can hold fly rods as well. And so I normally run with three rods, 2 to 3 rods, just depending
Okay.
on what I'm doing. But then I have the cooler I was talking about earlier, which is a 45 quart angle.
Yep.
And last fall is when I actually decided, because I was kind of sick and tired of like seeing a fish casting, and then by the time I can get my lure in the water, I'm like 50 yards away from the fish. So I got a little mushroom anchor. I think it's a 15 pound, and I put that inside the cooler, and I kind of just closed the line on the cooler so it's taut. And so I always make sure I have that anchor with me now, and that's really been a game changer.
Nice.
Um, and then I used to have a this I think it's called a Yak Attack stick pin, and it's basically like a little stick pin that most
Yeah.
kayakers,
Yeah.
but there's like an extension piece that you can put on it, and it becomes like a little push pull for a paddleboard.
Oh,
So I used to
sweet.
use that, and then one day fishing wasn't too good and throwing a little bit of fit, and safe to say I broke the extension piece. But we had those days. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, I mean I use that a lot when, especially in the summer when I'm just kind of cruising around, looking around. In the winter, I don't really care as much because the water's clear and it's easy to see. But yeah, those are definitely things. So the cooler, the black box, there's a little storage in there too. Then I have the rod holders, and then that's kind of really it. And then for tackle, I know a lot of kayak anglers and people that are looking to get into like paddle fishing. They're really hesitant, like, do you bring, like, how much tackle do you bring? What do you want to bring? Because
Yeah.
it's small paddle craft, so you can't bring that much tackle. So, like I was mentioning, my dad, he brings a little hip sack with him, and he has like a few soft plastics, some jig heads, some leader, and pliers, and that's about it. Well, I'm a little different, so I have this giant bag right here. It's was waterproof, but it's beat down pretty bad. But in here I got some Pro Cure, some pliers, line cutters, and then I carry a bunch of trays and stuff like top water, flies, jig heads, and I even got a whole little bag of soft plastics, probably like
Nice.
15, 20 bags. And but yeah, it just kind of depends. I like to have a lot of stuff with me. That's all my stuff. So I like to have it all with me in case some spur of the moment thing happens or giant fish or some weird things going on. I like to have all my stuff with me to be ready. But yeah, it's definitely the main thing when it comes to paddleboard fishing is knowing what you want to have on you when it comes to tackle, because a lot of people still, not many people are like me who try to bring as much as they can, like a giant backpack. Most people bring a little hip sack or like a few little bags of soft plastics, and that's it.
Yeah.
You can bring a lot more if you really want to.
For sure. What would you say kind of your confidence lures are? What do you like to throw typically?
Oh, so it's been all over the place in the past like half year. It used to always be the 1/8 ounce Blue Water Candy Aftershock jig heads, whatever
Yep.
color. That was my go-to jig head right there. I mean I catch hundreds and hundreds of flounder on those, and I catch a bunch of drum, and then I get a little DOA jerk shot, like a little DOA split tail minnow,
Uh-huh.
the Fiji chicken. That was a really good. I didn't really do well with it last year, but that was really good. I like the white, any white soft plastic. I really like the white goat shrimp. If the fish are being really finicky or in the winter they're just not having it, I can always go to that. And expect even with flounder in the summer, I mean that it catches everything. Honestly, I
Yeah.
caught everything on that. But I really like the white soft plastics.
It's
I'm
funny
not
how
really.
oh, sorry. It's funny how spooky fish sometimes the white works so well because it's so unnatural, just like a solid white piece of soft
Yeah.
plastic. Like, but they love it. But sorry, I completely interrupted you there. Keep going.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, sometimes I, like you said, like spooky fish will eat that, and that for the most part is true. But sometimes I've noticed like I'll be on a school of fish, like this actually happened like 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
I had a little white gold shrimp on, and there was a school of like 100, 120 redfish, and I got it right in front of them, and I just dead sticking it because they were being kind of finicky, and they just went right over it the entire school. And I notice that sometimes when I'm paddle fishing is like I'm throwing like a go-to color, like the shark, like a kind of chartreuse tail with like a, I don't know, like a kind of like Fiji chicken or what is it, chicken on chain
Chicken
color
on chain. Yeah.
body. Like I notice like sometimes they'll just shy away from it, and those points I realized I need to start throwing something really natural looking. So one of my friends, Oscar, actually told me about I don't know if you ever used these, but the Z-Man Mud Minnow Z's, the little ones, the mud minnow color.
I
He
haven't.
told
I know the mud minnow Z's, but I've never used the mud minnow color.
me
Is it like a
it's
brown, kind of a natural brown color?
it's got like a kind of like a dark algae green on top and like a silverish bottom with little like black specks in it.
Okay.
And he showed me that, and like we were fishing last year, and we were fishing, and I couldn't get him on any of my go-to baits, and he said, "Try this." And what do you know?
They were crushing it.
It's a really natural looking bait in the water, especially in the winter time. That's one of my go-to baits. I always make sure to have some of those on me in the winter.
What is the
But
tail like on that bait? What kind of tail does it have?
well, actually, I have some right here. It's a really, when I'll have it in the water. Here it is right here. But it's really got a lot of action.
Okay.
If
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
slowly swim it along, the tail just gets a ton of action, and I'll sometimes just jig it next to the board to see what it looks like. And I mean, just a little hop on it probably gets like 10, 15 little tail spins,
Little
and
tail
even when
spin.
just sitting there, just kind of moving in the current. But it's a really awesome action. I've never really been a fan of Z-Mans until like the past 2 years. I've started using them more, and I kind of got sick of paying all that money for gulp. And but
Gulp
yeah,
and it gets
it's
chewed up in like 0.05 seconds.
oh yeah, it's miserable. But yeah, it's definitely a really good color, and I like the whites, the natural looking colors. Spoons are I really like using spoons in the spring. I my dad really put me on that. He would have like 30 fish days, and I'd just be like, "What'd you catch him on?" He'd be like, "Every single fish on a gold spoon."
Oh yeah,
And
they love a gold spin.
it's crazy. And then I just started throwing top waters. That's probably one of my favorite ways to catch redfish. And for being honest, it's just blow up and just following it and
Oh yeah,
everything.
there's no way you can beat a topwater eat. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
watching them eat a fly, close to the surface is cool
oh
too.
yeah,
But
oh yeah,
they're so. I mean, sometimes they're real deadly, but typically redfish are like pretty sloppy when it comes to eating topwater, which honestly
yeah,
makes it more fun. I mean, they're just knocking it
yeah,
up out of in the air and they're missing it, and it's cool. I
yeah.
love when
It's
there's
great.
like two or three falling and one smacks it and knocks it up and misses it, and another one just smokes it as soon as it hits the water.
Oh
That's fun.
yeah,
I live for
yeah.
that right there.
But yeah, definitely. I would have to say the white little saw plastics with a 1/8 ounce or 3/16 ounce jig head, because I mostly do sight fishing now, but that's kind of my go-to bait right there. And then
Okay.
I've just started using the voodoo shrimps as well. Those seem to work really well for redfish in the winter. That's what I've noticed.
The
The
voodoo
smaller
shrimp.
ones,
Okay.
yeah, they're like the kind of natural colors.
Hmm.
I've done pretty well with those, but not with the trout. That's the whole reason I got them. Trout are a
Yeah.
whole different story. They're
Winter,
spooky.
especially wintertime trout and clean, clear water are very tough. So, do you fish any hard baits? Do you like fishing any hard baits or anything besides topwater?
I mean I've tried mirror lures. I'm just not a fan. I can't work a bait that slow. It's just hard for me. I've caught fish on them, but I've never caught one of those giant fish. I know I've seen and I've been on boats when people are landing giant trout on MR17s and MR18s and stuff, and it's just I can't work them. I mean I have a little box of them right here, and I only think I've used two of them out of like the six, and it's like 2 years old. But I mean, I use them. I also just started trying little or no Rapala jerk baits,
Yep.
the white little jerk baits. I just tried those this fall for trout, and that's the only thing I really use is for trout. That's the only hard plastics I'll throw.
Gotcha.
But I don't really throw anything besides top water and spoons for redfish.
Nice. Right on.
That's not hard plastic.
Well, if you were going to, this is one more question that I think is good for the Weekend Warrior series. This kind of idea. If you were going to be, fishing a new area, what are from your paddleboard? What are some of the things that you're going to be looking for? Say you're gonna from your launch, like you've picked your launch, but you've picked this area because the water you're looking at going to has like these things. What do you look for in the marsh for good fishing areas
So one of the
besides
main
fish
things.
themselves?
Oh, I do that a lot. I'll spook a lot of fish and go back over them. But I definitely say the first thing is if you're fishing up in like a big marsh and there's little creeks and little holes and stuff, I would definitely look and find deep holes. And that's how I kind of started catching fish on paddleboard was flounder. Is at dead low tide, even when like the fish are kind of stagnant, don't eat. I would catch like 40 fish out of like a tiny little hole that I could have like walked across
Yeah,
within
yeah.
like it was crazy. But that's kind of how I'd start. If you're targeting something like flounder, you just go to look for deep holes and like a small white gold shrimp, or even a 4-inch white gold shrimp. Just slowly work it on the bottom in the summer, and you should have no problem catching flounder. But
Yep.
when it comes to redfish and stuff, it's in my opinion, it's really hard to in one trip find redfish. But the best way I would say look for redfish would be looking for oyster beds or flats with like oysters on them, or like flats with kind of a deep hole next to it. And what I've also noticed is like up in the marsh is when like two creeks kind of converge. There's kind of like a medium depth, like 2 to 3 foot hole at low tide. I've noticed been kind of a decent spot for finding redfish schools.
Okay.
And then for trout, just find moving water. That's kind of it.
Yeah.
But around here, you can only really catch them in the fall, pretty thick. So
Yeah, it gets a little tougher in the winter. It's They hold my interest for a while, and then I'm like, all right, screw these trout. I'm gonna go redfish.
Oh yeah, definitely redfish are definitely my favorite ones to
They're fun.
catch.
They're super fun. The
Oh
visual
yeah.
aspect of it all. Was there anything else you want to leave people with? We're at 30 minutes here. Is there anything else you want to leave people with as far as inspiration or tactics as far as being a successful weekend warrior?
I mean, you just got to get out there and like most people say, you just got to put the time in. And I think the best way to efficiently use your time if you're going on a paddleboard or on a kayak is to go at lower tides and kind of see the contour of the land, see where the holes are, see where the structure is. And it really helps because then the fish are kind of condensed into little pockets.
Yeah.
So you know somewhere in this area, there's got to be fish at a higher tide. And I think that's just the key. You got to find the fish, and then you gotta go through a few baits, see what they like. Just in the winter in clear water, you want to stick with natural colors, and you just want another key thing is you really want to have some sort of thing that holds you in place,
Yeah.
with like an anchor or something. Because I know one of my buddies, Jack, whenever I take him out on we go out together a lot, and he doesn't have an anchor, and I'll put my anchor down, I'll cast, and then he'll cast, and I'll look over to my left right after, and he's like way across the hole from me, and he can barely even feel his line and just drifting and stuff.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely an anchor, something to hold you in place, and then you want to have I don't know if I think a lot of people know this, but especially with this hat, a little black under rim.
Oh
This
yeah.
is what I learned from someone. And then you want to have the amber colored lenses for sunglasses that are polarized.
For
And
sure.
that's what I've learned when it comes to sight fishing inshore, or just seeing stuff. It helps a huge amount.
100%. And I like what you said about the hat too, because I feel like a lot of people miss that. Some people will just want to wear sunglasses and no hat. And if you want to see into the water well,
Yeah.
sunglasses that sit tight to your face and a hat that's low where there's no light penetrating the side of your glasses. So like if
Oh
you
yeah.
really want to see well, pull your buff up on the bottom edge of your glasses, pull your hat down, and have your sunglasses there. That helps out a lot. But yeah, those are awesome tips, man. And thanks again, Griffin, for coming on. I mean, you catch a bunch of fish, and you're honestly one of very few like hardcore paddleboard fishermen here, and so I think it's super cool. And I'd love to see more guys out there paddleboarding and fishing. And it's a good workout and a great way to catch fish, and it's sneaky, and you can get anywhere you want to go at any tide. So
Oh
it's
yeah, it's an awesome way. But
that's
yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It was a great time, and hopefully people watching can learn a few things and maybe see a few of them out there on the water paddle
definitely.
fishing with me.
I
But
think we're gonna have you, like we were saying pre-show, back on to do a jigging episode. That Griffin and his dad do a lot of offshore fishing, a lot of jigging, and catch African pompano and amberjacks and tuna and all kinds of cool stuff. So we'll have to do that. We don't do much offshore stuff, but that's one that is very interesting to me. So we'll have
oh
to we'll
yeah,
have to do it. But
yeah,
well, thanks, man. I'm gonna close her out. Thanks again, guys, for tuning in to whatever episode this is. I don't know when it's going up, but we're just having so much fun with this podcast. We thank y'all for tuning in. And like I said, check out that Facebook group, and we will see you in the next episode. Later.